There was a time when his voice filled every room. A sound so smooth, it made pain sound like poetry. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He sang with the kind of calm that made you stop, listen, and wonder how someone could make heartbreak sound so beautiful. But time is a strange thing. It gives, and it takes. And in the end, even the voices that once ruled the airwaves can fall silent. Before Luther. Before Barry. Before Marvin. There was a man named Brook Benton. A gentleman of soul. A craftsman of melody. His songs defined love, his smile defined grace. But behind the velvet tone was a man fighting a quiet war. A war against the industry, against corruption, and against time itself. This is not just the story of a singer. This is the story of a man who gave everything to his art and watched the world forget his name. Tonight, we remember the dreamer from Camden. The voice that never lost its dignity. Brook Benton, the gentleman they tried to forget. Camden, South Carolina, 1931. A small town where the air smelled of pine and dust, where the rhythms of life were measured in work and worship. Benjamin Franklin P. was born here, the son of a bricklayer and a devoted mother whose voice carried prayers through the long nights. From the earliest days, Benjamin was surrounded by music, not just as entertainment, but as survival. The hymns of the church weren't just songs, they were lifelines, a way to tell a story bigger than oneself, to rise above fear and hardship. He was small, quiet, and thoughtful, yet his voice was remarkable, rich, resonant, and steady. Where other boys played games in the dusty streets, Benjamin could stop a room with his singing. His voice had a way of bending the light, of taking the weight of the world and shaping it into sound. By the late 1940s, Benjamin felt the pull of something bigger than Camden. The church had taught him faith. His neighborhood had taught him resilience. But he wanted the world to hear his voice, not just the words of others. He changed his name to Brook Benton, a moniker that rolled smoothly off the tongue, like a promise of sophistication and poise. With nothing but a few belongings, a heart full of hope, and the fire of ambition, he boarded a bus to New York City, the city of opportunity, danger, and dreams that could either shine or crush a man entirely. In New York, the world was loud, bright, and indifferent. He arrived with no money, no contacts, and no guarantees, just the steady beat of his heart and the certainty that music was his destiny. Every night, he walked the streets, listening to the hum of the city, imagining how his voice could rise above the noise. He sang wherever he could, on street corners, in tiny clubs, in the back of music stores, hoping someone would hear him, hoping someone would believe in him before the world taught him to doubt himself. But New York was not kind to dreamers. Brook soon realized that talent alone was not enough. In an industry controlled by connections and favors, a voice like his could easily be ignored. He saw other artists, some with less talent, some with less heart, rise faster because they understood the unspoken rules: who to know, who to pay, who to appease. Brook worked as a songwriter first, because it was the only way to get inside the doors of the music business. He wrote hits for other artists, sometimes anonymously, watching them receive applause, fame, and money that should have been his. It was a bitter lesson: the world would reward polish, connections, and compliance, not always genius. And yet, even in that quiet struggle, he never lost himself. He refused to compromise his integrity for a quick climb. He refused to play dirty in a system rigged with payola, bribery, and favoritism. If my songs are good enough, he whispered to himself, the world will hear them. One day. That determination, that patience, would define his life. He was not just a singer, he was a craftsman. And Brooklyn, as vast and merciless as it could be, would be the stage upon which he proved it. In Camden, they had taught him to sing for survival. In New York, he would learn to sing for eternity. New York City in the early 1950s was a machine, a relentless, humming, unforgiving machine. It devoured dreamers, polished stars, and even the cleverest of songwriters. Brook Benton, newly arrived, quickly realized that singing alone would not open doors. If he wanted to survive, he had to write. And write he did. He wrote songs for Nat King Cole. He wrote for Clyde McPhatter. He wrote for artists whose names later became legends, yet at the time, his own voice remained unheard. Every song he penned carried a piece of himself, the rhythm of his heartbeat, the honesty of his struggle, the longing of a young man who had left home chasing a dream. He watched others sing his words and take the applause. He saw labels give credit where it wasn't due. Each success that wasn't his felt like a whisper in his chest, a reminder that talent alone was not enough. And then there was payola. A shadow over the music industry, invisible to the audience, yet lethal to artists who refused to participate. Payola was simple: grease the right palms, and your record would play. Refuse, and even the best song could die unheard. Brook Benton had no interest in bribery. It wasn't in his nature. He believed that quality would triumph over corruption. And for a while, that belief kept him awake at night, wondering if he had made the right choice. He endured rejection after rejection. Labels ignored him. DJs refused his demos. And yet, he kept writing. Songs like So Many Ways and Endlessly were born in these lonely nights, long before the world would recognize them. Each lyric was a promise that one day, the voice behind the pen would be heard. But there was also heartbreak. Watching others succeed with his own words chipped at him. Every chart-topping record by someone else was a reminder that fame was not fairness. He learned a hard lesson early: in music, as in life, integrity and talent do not always guarantee recognition. Yet through every trial, Brook Benton's spirit remained unbroken. He knew that one day, his own voice would emerge from the shadows. And that day, the first true recognition of his talent, was closer than he realized. Because for Brook Benton, every song written for another was a step toward his own destiny. After years of waiting, struggling, and writing for others, Brook Benton finally stepped into the room that would change his life. Mercury Records. A single microphone. A quiet studio. He wasn't just singing a song, he was pouring decades of hope, heartbreak, and persistence into every note. The song, It's Just a Matter of Time. A ballad of patience, longing, and inevitability. When the tape rolled, something magical happened. His voice, smooth, commanding, and impossibly tender, seemed to float above the room. It wasn't just a song, it was confession. Every note carried the weight of his past: the streets of Camden, the empty clubs of New York, the songs written for others that never bore his name. And the world listened. It's Just a Matter of Time hit #1 on the R&B charts and crossed over into pop. Suddenly, the boy who had walked streets full of doubt was a star. But fame is never gentle. Behind the applause and flashing cameras lurked the same forces that had haunted him before: payola, label politics, and industry gatekeepers. Benton's victory was bittersweet. He had finally emerged, but the machine that had ignored him for so long was still in motion, still trying to control who could be heard and who could not. He felt the weight of expectation, not just from fans, but from an industry that wanted him to perform on its terms. He didn't compromise. He didn't chase trends. In his calm, he carried a quiet defiance, a refusal to let the industry turn him into someone he was not. Because for Brook Benton, true success was never about the charts. It was about staying true to the voice that had waited so long to be heard. There was something different about him. While other singers came to the stage wild and explosive, Brook Benton arrived calm, collected, yet somehow more powerful for it. He didn't have to raise his voice. He didn't need to move the crowd with theatrics or shouts. His tone, smooth as velvet and deep as midnight, carried a quiet command. He was the gentleman of soul. The early 1960s were his golden era. It's Just a Matter of Time. Endlessly. So Many Ways. Thank You Pretty Baby. Each song was a chapter of tenderness, a letter to lovers everywhere. Brook's music wasn't just heard, it was felt. It filled living rooms, car radios, and late-night dances. Women adored him for his sincerity. Men admired his composure. He represented something that had begun to fade from American music: dignity. On stage, he was elegance personified, crisp tuxedo, measured smile, every word carefully placed. But offstage, Brook Benton was humble, almost shy. He didn't crave attention. He preferred small gatherings, family dinners, long walks through quiet streets. The fame never truly changed him, but the industry around him was changing fast. By the mid-1960s, America was dancing to a new beat. Motown was rising. Soul music was getting louder, brasher, more political. Brook's refined romanticism began to sound like a relic to record executives hungry for youth and rebellion. Too proper, they said. Too clean. Too smooth for the times. But Brook refused to chase trends. He stayed true to melody, to feeling, to grace. His songs were not about protest or chaos, they were about love, hope, and the quiet strength of the human heart. And that made him timeless, even as the world around him shifted. When he sang So Many Ways, it wasn't just a love song, it was a sermon on loyalty. When he sang Kiddio, it wasn't just playful, it was pure joy wrapped in charm. He could make heartbreak sound noble, and longing sound like grace. Few could do what Brook did, turn vulnerability into power. But behind the scenes, there were cracks forming. The business was evolving. DJs began playing records that came with envelopes attached. Payola, the same disease that haunted him in his early years, was back with a vengeance. And Brook, ever the gentleman, refused to play that game. Some said he was too proud. Others whispered he was too naive. But Brook Benton knew the truth: once you sell your integrity, there's no buying it back. Still, his fans never left him. His voice remained a symbol of everything good about love: its purity, its longing, its endurance. In a world of noise, he was still the calm. In an era of chaos, he was still the gentleman. The 1960s belonged to many voices, but none like his. Because when Brook Benton sang, he didn't just tell you a story. He made you live it. Yet as the lights dimmed and trends changed, that same integrity that made him unique would soon make survival much harder. In the music industry, there was a game no one wanted to talk about, but everyone was forced to play. It was called payola. You didn't win by singing better. You won by paying more. The charts didn't reflect the people's choice, they reflected the size of an envelope. When the payola scandal hit the headlines in the late 1950s and early 60s, the public thought justice had been served. But behind closed doors, the system didn't die, it just learned how to hide. For artists like Brook Benton, who believed that talent and honesty should be enough, the game became unwinnable. "Brook, the market's changing," they'd say. "You gotta keep up. Maybe we grease the wheels a little." Everybody does it. But Brook's answer was always the same. If the song can't stand on its own, it don't belong on the radio. His integrity was unshakable. But integrity didn't pay for studio time. It didn't get airplay. And soon, the man once called the gentleman of soul found his name slipping further down the charts. The same radio hosts who once praised his charm now ignored his calls. He wasn't the sound of the youth, he was the sound of a disappearing era. His voice still carried fire and grace. But the machine no longer wanted class, it wanted controversy. Fame, once his closest friend, had now become a stranger. The payola system didn't just steal airtime, it stole dignity. Artists were divided into two camps, those who played along, and those who were left behind. Brook was one of the few who refused to bend. But that choice came with a heavy price. Fewer bookings. Smaller crowds. Record labels hesitated to renew his contracts. His name began to fade from marquees that once glowed bright. Yet even in the shadows, Brook never lost his faith in music. "If I can still sing," he told a friend, "then I'm still alive." And when he sang in those small rooms, something beautiful happened. The audience leaned closer. They weren't there for fame, they were there for truth. They could feel the pain behind every lyric, the weight of every note. His songs had matured, like aged wine, deeper, darker, more honest. The same system that tried to bury him had only sharpened his artistry. He no longer sang for charts or critics. He sang for the soul. Payola may have cost him the spotlight, but it could never erase the legacy of his voice. For Brook Benton, music was never about money, it was about memory. Every note was a confession. Every lyric, a piece of truth. And though his career had hit a storm, storms have a way of washing away the noise. What remains is what's real. Out of that storm, Brook Benton would find something deeper than fame, redemption. But redemption, like love, never comes easy. The 70s crept in quietly. For most people, Brook Benton was a memory, a name from another time. The voice that once filled grand stages now drifted through half-empty lounges and small-town clubs. But life has a strange way of returning gifts when you least expect them. Brook had known fame. He had felt the rush of applause, the sting of betrayal, and the silence that follows when the spotlight moves on. Yet, here in this tiny studio, surrounded by cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey, he found something he had lost long ago: peace. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and sang. Not for radio, not for critics, but for the rain, for the silence, and for every soul that had ever felt forgotten. Rainy Night in Georgia wasn't just another song. It was a confession. A confession of loneliness, survival, and the quiet dignity of a man who had seen everything and still stood tall. When it hit the airwaves in 1970, something unexpected happened. The world listened, really listened. For the first time in years, Brook Benton's voice was everywhere again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was real. Rainy Night in Georgia climbed to the top of the charts. Critics called it one of the most soulful songs ever recorded. And audiences called it something else, a healing. The song resonated because Brook had lived it. Every lyric, every sigh, every pause carried the weight of years of silence. In that moment, Brook Benton wasn't just a singer making a comeback. He was a survivor teaching the world that grace doesn't fade with time. The rain, once a symbol of sorrow, became a baptism. He sang through the storm and found his rebirth. No longer chasing the charts, he was chasing meaning. He had outgrown the industry that once used him. He had found something pure, a connection with the listener that went beyond radio stations and record executives. In that melody, they heard themselves. And for Brook, that was the greatest victory of all. After years of silence, Brook Benton had finally been heard, not as the industry's creation, but as a man, stripped of pretense, bearing his soul to the world. They said he was finished. They said he was forgotten. But legends don't fade, they return quietly, like the rain. By the time the 80s rolled around, the world had changed again. Disco had come and gone. Funk was fading. A new digital age was dawning. And for Brook Benton, the man who once ruled the airwaves with charm and velvet tones, the spotlight had grown faint. The crowds were smaller. The stages, humbler. But the voice, that deep, golden baritone, remained untouched by time. He sang with the same grace, even when the rooms held just a few dozen people. Because for Brook, the audience never shrank, only the spotlight did. He would perform songs like Kiddio, Think Twice, and Endlessly, his voice echoing through the walls of memory. The people who came to see him weren't chasing nostalgia, they were chasing truth. But while the music stayed strong, life outside the stage began to weigh on him. The years of touring, the bad deals, the betrayals, they had left their marks. He had seen peers rise and fall. He had watched younger artists sign the same contracts that once caged him. And sometimes, late at night, he'd shake his head and say, "If I told them what really goes on behind those label doors, they wouldn't believe me." The payola system that had once punished him still lived, in new forms, under new names. Radio wasn't the same, but the gatekeepers still decided who was heard and who was silenced. Brook had chosen dignity over deceit, and he paid for it with obscurity. There were moments when the phone stopped ringing. Moments when even old friends stopped calling. But those who knew him said Brook never grew bitter. He had that quiet kind of pride, one bandmate recalled. He knew what he'd done, and he didn't need applause to prove it. He found peace and simplicity, in small things. Sunday dinners. Family visits. Long drives through Georgia backroads. And sometimes, on a humid summer evening, you could hear him humming Rainy Night in Georgia to himself. The song that had outlived every contract, every scandal, every lie. By the time he reached his final years, Brook Benton understood something most artists never do. Fame is temporary. But truth endures. The man who refused to sell his soul had kept it intact. That was the price of dignity. And it was worth every lonely night. When Brook Benton left this world in 1988, he left behind more than songs. He left behind a standard. A reminder that elegance, restraint, and heart could still conquer noise and chaos. He was 56 years old. Too young for a voice that had aged like fine wine. But his music never died, it simply changed form. It slipped into the bloodstream of American soul, quietly influencing every singer who came after. You can hear him in the way Luther Vandross held a note. You can feel him in the phrasing of Al Green. And you can see him in every artist who refuses to bend their morals for fame. In the story of American music, Brook Benton is often left out of the headlines. But maybe that's fitting, because his art was never about noise. It was about quiet strength. The same industry that once betrayed him now calls him one of the greatest. His songs are studied, his lyrics quoted, his tone unmatched. And though the world moved on, his rain, still falls. Somewhere tonight, a jukebox plays his voice. Somewhere, a lonely soul hums endlessly, remembering love lost and found. Somewhere, Brook Benton is still singing. He sang for love, he sang for truth, and he paid dearly for both. But through every storm, through every deceitful hand that tried to silence him, Brook Benton remained what he had always been. The gentleman of soul. And just like his music, he lives on, endlessly.